even though you're just a high school graduate.
The new CEO and the department manager sneered at me. I wonder if they have any idea how hard I've worked up until now. Staying in this company any longer means there's no future for me. I decided it was time to cut my losses and move on. My name is Kurt Nolan, a 40-year-old corporate employee. I work as a manager in the product development department. Since I started working right after finishing high school, I have 22 years of experience. Quite a long time for my age. I chose not to continue my education due to financial reasons. I came from a big family, and unlike me, my siblings wanted to pursue specialized fields that required formal education. I want my tuition money to go toward helping my siblings instead. My parents were against the idea at first, but once I secured a job on my own, they reluctantly agreed. And that brings me to the present day. The company I joined grew over the past 22 years, not into a national corporation, but a respected, locally rooted business. During that time, I got married, and my siblings all followed their own paths. Nowadays, they always try to repay me in some way. The fact that I used to send money back home to help my family before I got married probably plays a big part in that. If you want to repay anyone, take care of mom and dad instead. I always say that, but my siblings always insist that they're grateful to me too, just as much as to our parents. Hearing that alone makes me happy. One day, a major event happened at our company. The CEO passed away. Had been the CEO since I first joined, so he was quite elderly. As time passed, I had fewer chances to talk to him, but in the old days, he always looked out for me. I shed tears at his funeral and prayed for his soul. But the story didn't end there. Not long after his passing, a new CEO took over, and he was quite a character. He was the late CEO's son, a highly educated elite. They say he gained a lot of experience training at companies overseas. At this point, everything sounded perfectly fine. In fact, it would be normal to have high hopes for the new CEO. When the new CEO, Mr. Anderson, was touring the company building, the second incident occurred. Since he had been working abroad for so long, he wasn't familiar with the headquarters layout. He said he wanted to inspect each department one by one to get a clear picture. At this point, I felt a sense of respect for Mr. Anderson. I thought, as expected of the former CEO's son,
Kurt, stop spacing out. Mr. Anderson is visiting today. Shape up.
while I was sitting at my desk, thinking about Mr. Anderson, a loud voice suddenly interrupted me. At the same time, I felt a sharp thump on my back, causing me to frown instinctively. I looked up and saw a man smirking down at me. David, that hurt. I was working seriously. I protested while rubbing my back. I was just trying to snap you out of it. No need to be so dramatic. If the department manager acts like this, the entire team's reputation is affected, and you're already an embarrassment as a high school graduate. I sighed. David Kellen had been my senior since I joined the company, and had always had a mean streak. He mocked me for not attending college and pulled childish pranks. Ironically, I had known him so long that I'd gotten used to it. It was practically routine for me to brush off David's antics. Even the junior staff would discreetly caution him while treating it as just another normal day. A few hours later, Mr. Anderson finally reached our department, the Product Development Division.
Welcome. My name is David Kellen, the department head. I may not be as accomplished as you, but I did graduate from a prestigious university.
David eagerly introduced himself. Did he really need to mention his academic background? But Mr. Anderson raised his eyebrows in apparent admiration.
Interesting. If the department head has a strong academic background, that's reassuring. So, what products are you currently developing?
In response to Mr. Anderson's question, David gave me a nudge and said, "Hey."
Kurt, explain it to Mr. Anderson.
Though David was the department head, in recent years, had been slacking and wasn't even up to date with the department's projects. He often dumped tasks on me. I was inwardly annoyed, but I knew if David gave a poor explanation, it could harm the department's reputation. Allow me to explain. As I began to speak, Mr. Anderson's expression briefly clouded over.
Wait, your name is Kurt, right? What's your educational background?
Why does that matter? I thought but knew there was no point in lying. I answered truthfully that I was a high school graduate. Mr. Anderson's expression darkened visibly.
You've got to be kidding me. Who hired someone with just a high school diploma? It lowers the company's prestige.
I froze at his harsh words. The former CEO did. David leaned in and whispered something to Mr. Anderson, who sighed.
Oh, I see. My father was too soft. Seriously, what can a high school graduate contribute anyway?
Is this guy really the former CEO's son? I hate to say it, but I couldn't help grumbling that in my head. One of my subordinates, who usually stands up for me when David messes around, stepped forward and said, with all due respect, as if about to challenge Mr. Anderson. I quickly stopped him. It would be a disaster if my subordinate got dragged into this mess. But, he started, but I shook my head.
What is it? Do you have something to say?
Mr. Anderson frowned and glared at both me and my subordinate. No, sir. He was just reminding me that it's time for the meeting we discussed. It was a flimsy excuse, but I really did have a business meeting scheduled for today. I was supposed to accompany sales and give a detailed presentation on our new product.
What? A high school graduate like you is going to a business meeting? David, what's going on here?
David's face lit up with glee. At that moment, I had a bad feeling about where this was going. I thought it was inappropriate for Kurt to handle it, but he insisted on doing it himself. He probably used some underhanded trick. High school grads are always scheming. David's comment made Mr. Anderson chuckle as he said, "No doubt. What is wrong with these two? They don't seem like decent adults at all." I couldn't believe the things they were casually saying. Then Mr. Anderson made an outrageous statement.
As the CEO, I'm giving an order. David, you go to the meeting instead. We can't entrust something this important to a high school graduate.
Yes, sir. And while we're at it, I'll fire Kurt today.
Good idea. I approve. We don't need someone from the bottom of the barrel in this company.
Is this really happening in a modern-day workplace? It was so absurd that I thought I might be dreaming. I never imagined I'd have to listen to such ridiculous things in this day and age. Mr. Anderson and David both had smug grins, and behind them, I could hear the confused murmurs of my team. When the former CEO passed away, I had resolved to continue supporting the company he cherished. But is there any point in staying at a company led by someone like this? Besides, I have a wife, family, and many people I care about. When I think about what I need to protect, maybe it's time to cut my losses and leave. Sure, Finding a new job at my age will be tough, but you'll make it work. A flurry of thoughts raced through my mind. So, that's how it is. High school grads are worthless and unnecessary. That's what you're saying, right? I murmured, as if confirming.
I've been saying that from the start. Exactly. This is what happens with people who lack a proper education.
Exactly.
David exaggeratedly nodded in agreement, buttering up Mr. Anderson. The team was glaring at Mr. Anderson and David with disdain, but the two seemed oblivious. I deliberately smiled at them. Understood. I'll submit my resignation tomorrow. The team murmured in surprise, but Mr. Anderson and David looked satisfied. After Mr. Anderson left, David approached me as I began clearing my desk.
Man, everything went exactly as I wanted. It's almost scary how perfectly it worked out.
I shot him a suspicious look, but David kept talking with that sickening grin. He had done his research and knew Mr. Anderson shared his obsession with academic credentials. So, he had deliberately brought up his educational background to steer Mr. Anderson's attention toward mine. No wonder he had awkwardly said, "I'm a graduate of a prestigious university." I couldn't help but chuckle.
What are you laughing at? Is this sour grapes? I've been dying to get rid of you. Now that you're leaving, it's a breath of fresh air.
David, that's too much. Do you have any idea how much Mr. Nolan has helped us?
One of my subordinates raised his voice in protest. More and more voices chimed in with shouts of, "Yeah, that's right."
Enough. Quiet down.
David yelled in an attempt to silence them. But the dissatisfaction of the team didn't subside. I had a feeling I wasn't the only one considering leaving. Sensing their sentiments, I stepped in to calm them down. "Everyone, am really grateful for your support. If I could, I would love to keep working with all of you. Thank you for everything." When I said this, some of my team members teared up, calling out, "Kurt." David, now completely isolated, snorted and continued glaring at me until the end. A year after my resignation, I was working at my new job. My parents back home knew I'd quit, and my brother helped me find a new position. My new role was also in product development, so I adjusted to the work quickly.
This is nothing compared to everything you've done for me.
My brother had said, but I was nothing but thankful. One day, I received an external call. The employee who answered said the caller was David Kellen, my former manager. She asked, "What should I do?" I hesitated, but eventually said, "Put him through." To be honest, I had no good memories of David and didn't want to take the call, but I figured he might not be calling for personal reasons. After all, I had joined a company that was now a direct competitor to my previous employer. On the surface, the two companies maintained professional relations, but internally, they saw each other as fierce rivals. If it was a work-related matter, I couldn't just avoid it. Besides, I doubted David even knew I had joined the rival company. With that in mind, I took a deep breath to prepare myself. After a brief moment of hold music, the call connected. "Hello, this is Kurt Nolan speaking." Before I could say anything else, my words were drowned out by David's furious shouting. I instinctively pulled the receiver away from my ear, but I could still hear David shouting. Once his yelling stopped, I brought the phone back to my ear. "And what can I do for you today?" When I asked again, David, panting, answered,
You're Kurt Nolan, who used to work for us, right? I can't believe you joined a rival company." Typical of a high school graduate. You ungrateful traitor.
I had suspected as much when he first started yelling. It seemed he knew exactly who I was before calling. According to David, he found out about my new position while talking with one of our sales representatives. Yes, they welcomed me warmly. Unlike your company, they don't belittle me for my education. They evaluate my skills fairly. I've been incredibly fortunate. I said it with a hint of sarcasm, and David let out a frustrated grunt. Did you call just to yell at me like you used to? Since this doesn't seem to be about work, may I end the call now?
Wait, it is about work. Don't hang up.
David's loud voice stopped me again. As far as I remembered, there wasn't any pending matter that required direct contact with my former company. David's voice suddenly changed, replaced by someone else's. Mr. Anderson, the son of the former president.
It's been a while. I need to talk to you. I'm coming over. This is important.
After saying that, Mr. Anderson hung up without waiting for a response.
Kurt, are you okay?
It was my new boss, Casey Ivan, checking in on me. Actually, I proceeded to explain everything that had just happened.
He's coming without an appointment? That's troublesome. But since he is the company president, we can't exactly turn him away. All right. Could you check if the conference room is available? I'll join you for the meeting.
Casey, am really sorry to trouble you. He smiled wryly.
I can't just ignore a situation like this for one of my team.
He patted my shoulder reassuringly, and I quickly called the internal line to secure the conference room. Not long after, Mr. Anderson and David arrived at our office. I led them to the conference room. Mr. Anderson seemed displeased that Casey was accompanying me.
Why is there an outsider here?
If anything, you're the outsider here, I thought to myself.
A company president and a department head are visiting. We couldn't have someone as new as Kurt handle this alone.
Mr. Anderson snorted and said, "Fine," before gesturing for David to speak. It looked like he was letting David explain the reason for their visit.
I'll get straight to the point. Come back to our company. Mr. Anderson is even willing to overlook your lack of a degree.
I couldn't help but exchange glances with Casey. I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you mean. I have no intention of returning to your company. I tried to keep my tone polite, but the truth slipped out.
Recently, your company launched a new product. Word is, you were the lead developer. For a high school graduate, you're surprisingly talented, huh?
I nodded at Mr. Anderson's words. Yes, I was indeed the lead developer. Thankfully, sales are still growing. When I answered, David shot me a hateful glare and began recounting the situation. The story went back to when our company's new product was launched.
The competitor's new product is selling like crazy.
David had reportedly turned pale after hearing employees groaning about the situation. David's team had released their own product around the same time as ours.
Our warehouse is full of unsold stock. We're looking at a $120 million loss at this rate.
The employees were practically screaming about their poor sales figures. I remember reviewing their product back then. It was just an updated version of their previous product with new color options and minor bug fixes. Meanwhile, our product had been upgraded with brand new features that had never been seen before. Yet they marketed their product with exaggerated taglines. Since David's company was in the same industry as ours, their product lineup was very similar to ours. When two similar products launch at the same time, It's obvious which one customers would choose.
So, you want Kurt to come back?
Casey asked incredulously.
How dare you? I'm a company president. Don't you realize how disrespectful you're being?
Mr. Anderson snapped, but I remained composed. And who's really being disrespectful? You came here unannounced and demanded I come back with flimsy excuses. You even say you'll overlook my education? Enough of this condescension. I'm an employee here now, and I'll fulfill my role here. My statement made both Mr. Anderson and David turn red with anger.
You're just a high school graduate. Do you even know who you're talking to?
Casey stared at Mr. Anderson and David with a cold, disapproving gaze. Standing beside him, I spoke clearly. This obsession with someone's academic background, it's time to let that go. Think carefully about what your father envisioned for the company's future. Then I turned to David. And you, David, you've always treated me bad because of my background. But how about you? Your only claim to fame is your degree. Do your subordinates really look up to you? My words left both Mr. Anderson and David speechless. Casey, who had been quietly observing, spoke up.
They'll be reporting all of this to our company's CEO. I assume you're aware that your actions will affect how we handle future dealings.
Damn it. We're leaving, David.
Mr. Anderson shot to his feet and stormed out of the room. David, pale and flustered, hurried after him. It was like a whirlwind, but I felt oddly relieved to have said everything I needed to say. A few more years passed. Word in the industry was that Mr. Anderson and David were no longer with the company. Mr. Anderson had been ousted for losing the shareholders' trust due to his reckless management. A new CEO was appointed by the shareholders, and the company had moved on. David had reportedly been dismissed for misconduct, including harassment of his subordinates and his failures in product development. As for me, I was awarded by my new CEO for my contributions and had since been promoted to assistant director. I'm grateful to my brother for introducing me to this company. Although I've moved up in rank, I aspire to be a leader who doesn't judge people solely by surface-level information, unlike Mr. Anderson and David,